Hello, good afternoon, everyone. I hope you are all well and doing and are safe during these very difficult times. My name is Edward James. I'm the Director of Content and Analysis at MEED Projects, and I'll be presenting the webinar today, looking at the data from the MENA Projects market for the first half of the year and how it is impacting the Middle East MENA region. So as ever, it's a pleasure to have you with us. This is going to be about a half-an-hour presentation, after which you had the opportunity to submit some questions to me. This presentation is being recorded, so don't feel you have to note down all the information that you hear today. You will have an opportunity to look at it in your own time. We will send you the link to the recorded webinar over the next couple of days. Now, for those of you who don't know, I work for MEED Projects. MEED Projects is an online projects tracking tool covering all major projects in the MENA, Central Asia and East Africa regions. Currently, there are about 15,000 active projects worth more than $10 million in the areas covered by MEED Projects. So that provides us with a lot of data to be able to quantify what's happening in the market and be able to present you with the latest trends as well as opportunities and issues facing the market. If you want to know more about MEED Projects, you can visit our website, meedprojects.com. So as ever, I'll be taking some questions afterwards, as I mentioned. If you do have any questions, please submit them into the Q&A box, and I will read them and try to answer them if I can at the end of this presentation. So let's start off by looking at the latest with COVID-19, how it's doing around the world, the latest data. So as of yesterday, you can see here we have several million, unfortunately, cases of COVID-19, now more than 12 million, 13 million, as you can see on this graph, of which nearly 1.5 million have been in the last week. So there is an acceleration in COVID-19 cases around the world. It's very much still with us. It's not dying down, although in some countries it's better than others. We have seen it accelerating in places like the US, Russia, India, Brazil, for example. As you can see, 13 million cases. We've had 7.2 million recoveries, and tragically, we've had more than 500,000 deaths. In terms of where the largest number of cases are right now, as you can see, the US leads the way with more than 3 million cases. Brazil, another very largely populated country, has close to 2 million. And then we can see how India and Russia are also in second, third and fourth rankings here, approaching 1 million cases each. In other countries, we've seen the number of cases stabilize, but of course this is dynamic data. It will change from day to day, and some countries will emerge on this list, others will die down. It's very much changing and fast evolving situation. And then in terms of the new deaths in the globally, you can see here that Brazil now has the largest number of new deaths in terms of a 7-day rolling average. As you can see, 1,000 new deaths over a 7-day average. We then have the US, about 700, and then other countries. So we've seen the number of deaths considerably drop in some markets, particularly in Europe. In other countries, we've actually seen an increase in the number of fatalities. Now, looking at the Middle East, how is that performing? And we passed in the last few days the 1 million infections mark in the MENA region. You can see here how that is split. You see that Saudi Arabia, which has the largest population in the GCC, is also got the most cases, nearly approaching 240, 250,000. We then have Qatar, Bahrain, Kuwait, UAE, and Oman here between 100,000 and 30,000 cases. So very much in the midst of the epidemic also here in the region. So now let's take a look at how COVID-19 is impacting the different economies and finances of the MENA economy. So here I've taken some data from the IMF, looking at the changes in real GDP growth. And as you can see from this column here, in the 2020 column, the IMF is now forecasting a substantial drop in real GDPs for these oil exporters. You can see Algeria 5.2% decline in annual GDP, Qatar 4.3%, Saudi minus 2.3%, UAE 3.5% drop. And in some cases, even these could be considered quite conservative. Of course, you have quite a sharp drop this year, and as a result, we are expecting quite a substantial recovery in 2021. As you can see, we have a 4.2% decline in 2020 on average. In 2021, we expect to see a 4.7% growth or rebound. So a kind of V-shaped decline and recovery here. So we have 7.2% growth in Iraq next year, 3.3% in Oman, 2.9% in Saudi Arabia. So it's going to be a very difficult year for the remaining 5 months of the year, but the IMF is hopeful that there will be a recovery in 2021. Now, clearly, as oil prices have dropped and governments have increased expenditure to try to combat the epidemic, as well as in light of the lockdown and slowdown in economic activity, then we're also expecting to see almost every economy in the region go into deficits this year. This lower table here, this lower table shows you that, as you can see, Saudi Arabia is expected to see a 12.6% of its GDP into deficit this year, 11% in the UAE, ranging as far as 22% in Iraq. And of course, with the deficit, that means governments either have to earn more money, which is going to be difficult because of low oil prices, or they cut spending, and that's what unfortunately we're seeing in the recent months. And then 2021, we've got a similar scenario again, where the deficit is expected to continue. Only in Qatar is the government expected to show a small surplus both this year and next. So as I mentioned, governments in the MENA region have reacted to the lockdown and the epidemic by increasing spending. As you can see here, the fiscal response as a percentage of GDP is highlighted by this IMF graph. You can see that Bahrain has injected a stimulus of up to 6% of its GDP into the economy. Saudi Arabia, its response has been almost 5% of its GDP being allocated as a stimulus for the economy. In UAE, it's 2%. In Algeria, outside the GCC, it's 8%. In Iran, it's close to 6%, and so on. And the overall impact of the COVID-19 pandemic is, as you can see here in this graph, acutely shown here by this fall in 2020 real GDP growth, again reflecting it in a graph format. So you can see here in 2020, between 3 and 4% on average decline in the region's GDP. So unfortunately, a pretty negative outlook for the economies of the region this year, but as hardly a surprise given the situation. Okay, so that's the context we currently find ourselves in. Now let's look at the impact on project spending. So we're now into July, so we were able to take the first 6 months of the year data and have a look at how the market has performed. First, let's take a look at June data and compare it with June in previous years. And as you can see here in the dark blue bars on the rightmost hand side of the country, each country, you can see here that in the case of Saudi Arabia and the UAE, spending in June was well down on the same month last year and the previous 4 years before that. So, for example, in the UAE, we saw about $500 million of contracts awarded in June, compared with more than $2 billion in June last year. Likewise, in Saudi Arabia, just a couple of $100 million of contracts awarded, compared with $1 billion in June last year. And the picture, with some exceptions, is replicated across other markets. Now, for the MENA region as a whole, if I look at June 2020, just under $3 billion worth of contracts were awarded, compared with $5.7 billion in 2019. So that's a year-on-year decline of 48%. And as we can see, regardless of the COVID-19 situation, we see that the market has actually been on a long-term decline in any case year on year, as economies of the region have struggled with lower oil prices since the oil price started falling in late 2014. Right, now let's take the whole 6 months together and let's look at each month this year in the MENA region, and we can see here the stark impact of the lockdown and COVID-19. So in January and February, before the impact and the lockdown took hold, we saw $11.7 billion of contracts awarded in the MENA in January and $13.2 billion in February. However, in March, this halved, more than halved, to $6.1 billion, and then $5.5 billion in April, $3.3 billion in May, and just under $3 billion in June. So there's actually been a month-on-month fall since March in the MENA region. And you can see here, on the two left-hand columns, pre-COVID-19, and the four right-hand columns, post-COVID-19. So you can see just what the impact has been of the pandemic on project spending and contract awards in the region. So let's look at the first 6 months of the year compared with the first 6 months of the year in previous years. As you can see here, in 2020, just under $43 billion worth of contracts were awarded in January to June in the MENA region, compared with $55 billion in 2019. So that's a year-on-year decline between the two periods of 22%. But as you can see, that's also something that we've seen in previous years. Since 2015, when we last saw oil prices around $100 a barrel, we've seen a year-on-year increase in each of the previous succeeding 5 years in terms of project spending. So what COVID-19 has done is really accelerate that decline even further into 2020. So the market is less than half the size it was back in 2015. Now let's take that same data, that first 6 months of the year data, and we can see here how each country has performed. You can see again here, actually, UAE and Iraq are the two worst hit countries. You can see the UAE in January to June spent a little over $10 billion, compared with about $17 billion in 2019, and more than $25 billion in 2018. Other countries actually on a 6 month or first half of the year basis haven't performed too badly. So Saudi Arabia, although it's down on the 2019 figure, is actually higher. Spending was higher in the first 6 months than in 2018 and in 2017. Likewise, Oman, Qatar, although down on the first half of last year, are actually not too much in decline. Kuwait is actually up. And you can see here, Jordan and Iraq well down. Egypt, Bahrain, fairly steady. So the picture on a 6 month basis actually differs very wildly from country to country. Overall, the total figures for the MENA region are down, but in some countries is actually flat, or indeed even higher than last year. It's only really in Iraq, Jordan, and UAE where we are seeing a very sharp fall. Now let's take a look at the data for the first half of the year by sector. You can see which sectors have been hit the hardest. You can see construction is down 30% year on year. It's the hardest hit sector. So in 2019, we had about $23 billion of contracts awarded between January and June. This year, about $17 billion, so 30% fall, and certainly a considerable fall, more about 50% from the 2017 figure. On the other hand, you can see here power is marginally up for the first half of the year on last year. Likewise with gas. Then we can see that oil and water and industrial projects are actually are also down, a bit like construction. So just as some countries have performed differently, you can also see that some sectors have also performed in a different way as well. Some have actually been more resilient than others. And on this right-hand side, we have the project data for June. You can see here, again, very sharp fall in construction sector spending. Clearly, construction sector, a lot of it is driven by the real estate in Dubai, and that is had oversupply challenges, lack of demand, and that's also been a contributing factor. And we have in June just less than $1 billion of contracts awarded, compared to $2 billion in 2019 and more than $4 billion in 2018 and 17. Likewise, on a month basis, we can also see in June that transport was well down on June last year, and water as well. On the other hand, other sectors are either slightly up or flat. So what were some of the key contracts awarded in June? Here just to give you an idea of some of the major deals awarded last month. We have the Beersheba field contract, phase 2 in Algeria, $400 million. We then saw 3 major contracts on the Adam Thumrait Road, packages 3, 4, and 5 in Oman awarded. This is a project funded by the externally by the other GCC states, so that's been able to contribute to the funding for that project. We've also seen a long-awaited contract award for the Al Rus Road from Central Road to the Fahahil Ahmadi Road in Kuwait, recently awarded as well, which is a promising development. In Egypt, we had an interesting new Black Sands EPC contract awarded on the north coast for the El Beiruz floating concentrator mineral separation plant. We saw Archirodon win the BAM compression facilities expansion phase 3. We saw fit out works contract awarded on the Lusail iconic hotel project for Qatar, and we have a range of other significant deals. But at $400 million, being the largest project, you can see that it was a pretty lean month overall for new contract awards in the MENA region. So let's have a look at what's going to happen next. So what are the big projects currently out to bid in the market, which are have been tendered and where bids in some cases have been submitted and are under evaluation? So in other words, these projects here are the projects which are most likely to be awarded over the next few months. As you can see, there's some very significant deals here, some major projects across different sectors, across different markets, gives you an idea of what we can see or can be expected to be awarded. The biggest project of all is, of course, the LNG program in in Qatar. This is technical bids have been submitted, waiting for final commercial bids to be submitted and then to be evaluated, and the onshore program, this could be worth as much as $20 billion. Now, it's not yet clear whether this is going to be awarded this year or will it be awarded in early 2021. Nonetheless, this will provide a significant boost to the project market in the region. Another, likewise, I'll talk about this later, the Hel and Gasha, 4 major packages, several $1 billion each. This is going to be a major injection for the stimulus project spending in the UAE. Likewise, we've got the Tawila B IWPP expansion, and also another major project which we expect to be awarded this year. And as you can see here, a range of other oil, gas, transport and construction projects across the region. But perhaps the largest construction spend this year will be on the public facilities in Qiddiya. As well, along with other PIF projects, it's been announced that spending is going to continue. There isn't going to be a delay in proceeding with them. They are all being developed on a fast-track basis, and we are hopeful that that will provide much needed impetus for the project spending and project market overall in Saudi Arabia over this year and the next couple of years. So we haven't revised our forecast since the last webinar that we gave 3 weeks ago. Currently, we are anticipating between $61 billion in a worst case scenario and $82 billion in a best case scenario for project spending in the GCC. As of beginning of June, we were on $131.7 billion. So we are fully expecting overall spending to fall at the end of the year between $61 and $83 billion in the region. Obviously, that's considerably lower than $105 billion awarded in 2019, and again, even further lower than the $127 billion we originally expected to be awarded this year for the GCC as a whole. So regardless of what happens, we do expect the market to show quite substantial contraction this year, unfortunately. Again, we haven't changed our longer term outlook and view on overall project spending in 2021 and 2022. Again, we've split that into best case and worst case scenarios. In the best case in 2021, we expect to see about $105 billion of contracts awarded and a slight increase on that in 2022. In a worst case, a little over $80 billion in 2021 and approaching $90 billion in 2022. So at best, we don't expect to see the market beat the 2019 figures in 2021 and only just exceed that in 2022. This is the new normal, it seems, for the projects market in the region. Now, just a reminder, please, to submit your questions in the Q&A box, and I will do my best to answer them once I've delivered or finished this webinar. And again, no change in the future pipeline for project activity. If there is some consolation for the current situation, is that the pipeline for the projects market in the region remains as strong as ever. Saudi Arabia leads the way at more than $1.2 trillion, followed by the UAE at close to $800 billion, and then Egypt, Iraq, Kuwait, Iran, Qatar, Oman, and Algeria at each between $150 billion and $400 billion. So we have seen a slowdown in project spending, but we can be hopeful that there's still a huge pipeline. We have not seen the pipelines reduce. We haven't seen a large number of projects being cancelled so far, and certainly the need and the demand for projects and infrastructure in the region is still as high as it's ever been. Okay, now I'm just going to touch on some of the key projects which are out in the market at the moment, which people are talking about and which are coming, hopefully will be awarded over the next few weeks and months ahead, and to provide some optimism for the market overall. The first one is the Hale and Gasha sour gas development for ADNOC. This is a project that's been out in the market for some time now. Commercial bids are due very soon. It's a multi-billion-dollar project to produce sour gas for power generation industrial purposes. It's about 1.5 billion cubic feet a day in total, 120,000 barrels of oil equivalent condensate. You may remember that the $1.4 billion contract for the artificial islands was awarded last year to NMDC. And as I said, there were 4 major packages out to bid, and companies are currently preparing their commercial offers. With any luck, we'll see this project awarded by the end of the year. The very fact that the artificial islands contract is already awarded and underway provides a lot of hope that the final investment decision has been made and this project will proceed. So this is certainly something that's going to act as a major stimulus for oil and gas sector spending, and something that's being watched with eager anticipation across the region. Now, another interesting project I wanted to touch on, because this is quite unique, or fairly unique for the MENA region, and that's a new nuclear power complex which is currently under construction in the north coast of Egypt, El Dabaa. This is the Arab world's second nuclear power program, after the one in Abu Dhabi in Baraka, which is nearly finished. This one, on the other hand, is just getting underway. It's being undertaken in cooperation with the Russians, who are financing and providing technology for this project through Rosatom and Atomstroy Export. It's going to take about 10 years. It's going to cost about $30 billion. And the first works packages have already been tendered and awarded for site works, for labour accommodation, for access roads, fencing, basic utilities, and so on. So over the next couple of years, expect to see a major ramp up in tendering and project activity for this project. And I wanted to highlight it because it is certainly fairly significant in terms of both project market in Egypt, but given that there were a few nuclear power projects across the region as a whole, it's something that's worth keeping an eye on. And over the next 18 months or so, I would expect to see decisions being made on the Saudi nuclear program, on its selection of international partner, whether that's the Japanese, the Koreans, the French, Russians, or Chinese, and start to see that also ramp up, which is also going to be a fairly new sector for Saudi Arabia. And then thirdly, there's also potential for Jordan to have its own nuclear power program too. Slightly different, but also renewable, is the REPDO, the Saudi Renewable Energy Project Development Office, second phase program for solar projects in Saudi Arabia. As you can see, we have bids submitted for 6 major solar plants in Jeddah, Kurayat, Al Faisaliya, Rabigh, Medina, and Rafah, costing about $1.5 billion. We would expect to see award on these contracts to be made over the next few weeks. Again, because it's private sector finance using project finance, then we don't have to worry about the government funding of the project. It is going to be funded by the private sector and paid off over many years. And so the current situation with government finances is not so much of a factor. And that provides more encouragement these projects will go ahead. We are very much in the middle of a revolution for renewable energy in the region. Solar energy is now as cheap to produce. Solar energy capacity is as cheap to produce as gas-fired production. And as a result, we are going to expect to see a significant increase in the number of solar projects in and around the region. And then finally, just on the construction side, I wanted to touch on a development we learned about last week on the NEOM project. So NEOM is the region's and probably the world's largest single project, about $500 billion. It involves the construction of a totally new city in the far northwest of Saudi Arabia, alongside the Sinai Peninsula on the borders of Egypt and Jordan. And as part of this, it will involve an industrial cluster, residential, touristic zones, commercial zones, and so forth. And it's just huge. $500 billion over the next 30 years of investment plan is going to be something that will keep the construction industry in the region busy for many years ahead. Last week, we learned about the award to AECOM of the Spine Infrastructure and Utilities Corridor design contract, and also, of course, the Executive Program Management contract to Bechtel. AECOM's job is basically going to be to design the spine infrastructure. So this is a 120-kilometer long corridor on this alignment across NEOM, which will involve the construction of a new railway, high speed, possibly a maglev line, road network, local rail and freight networks, a lot of tunnels and viaducts as a result of this. Clearly, new stations and depots will be required, and also a utilities corridor either side of this of the infrastructure spine. So this marks a very significant step in the development of NEOM, and also provides a bit of a better understanding how it is expected to develop. I understand that the initial focus is going to be around the Straits of Tiran on the Sindala Islands, and a coastal city resort, and in this area, which I'm circling here on the tip of the peninsula before it hits where the Straits of Tiran are. And this is going to be the first phase of the project, which will involve a residential, commercial and transport element. And you may also recall this week or last week an announcement by NEOM Air Products and Aquapower for a $5 billion ammonia facility as one of the first major industrial developments to be announced in NEOM as well. So after a long period of silence, there are signs that NEOM is gathering pace and is still very much in the sights of the Saudi Arabia government, and is still very much keen to continue to deliver this project. Okay, so that's all for me in terms of the presentation today. If you do want any more to know any more information on MEED Projects or MEED.com, our sister service providing news, analysis, and features, please visit the websites MEEDprojects.com or MEED.com, and we'll be happy to tell you more about them. So thank you very much for that and for your attention. I'll now go and read your questions and answer any if I can. So feel free to submit them and I'll do my best to answer them. Okay, so someone has said, can you explain more about the high project awards in Oman during June 2020? Well, the easy answer to that question is that the large value of work awarded in Oman is mainly down to the 3 packages awarded on the Adam Thumrate road, packages 3, 4, and 5, which are between $200 and $300 million each. The reason that they've been awarded is because they are funded by other GCC states rather than the Omani government, and that is why they have been able to proceed, even though the Sultanate has said that it's going to slow down spending considerably and is cutting back on project spending this year. That's the main reason why junior awards were so high in Oman and why those particular project packages were able to go ahead. A question is, what happened to petrochemicals in June 2017 to 20, as 18 to 20 are missing? Simple answer again for that is that there were no contract awards in petrochemicals in those months, in those years. Petrochemicals tends to be high value, but a few number of projects, and therefore it's not uncommon to have some months without any petrochemical spending at all in terms of new projects. I hope that answers that question. So the projects, another question, the projects which you're considering for analysis, do these projects consist of parent projects with children projects, or the parent projects are not included? So any analysis that we give it always avoids duplication of data. So we will include parent projects, net value, that is the budget value minus the value of the children, but we will never double count the budgets of both the children projects and the parent projects. So there is no duplication in the value of the data. Of course, when we look at the future pipeline and so on, there is an assumption. It is just the pipeline data. Of course, not all projects will proceed. Budgets will change. Sometimes budgets are exaggerated, but nonetheless, it is indicative of the future spending levels and what each country is planning. However, we never supply double counting of children and parent projects. Do you have an update on the Shagaya renewable project in Kuwait? I heard that it was cancelled. That's correct. The government in Kuwait announced just yesterday or today that it had cancelled the 1.15 gigawatt solar complex at Shagaya, which was being planned by KNPC. It's unfortunate. Bids were submitted a year ago for that, and by different developers, and KNPC had been exploring whether to do it on an EPC basis even, rather than on a PPP basis, but unfortunately a decision was announced today that the government had decided to cancel the project. It remains to be seen whether they will revive this project in a different format later on, but it is obviously a blow to renewable energy hopes in Kuwait. Waste to energy or renewable sector should be separated to get idea and focus on total spending of governments. I'm not sure if that's a question or just a statement. We have seen an increase certainly in waste to energy projects in the GCC. Obviously, we have the Bia Mazda project in Sharjah. We've got also Dubai's got a waste to energy project underway. We have the CAP in Kuwait with its waste to energy project also planned. So Oman and OPWP has a waste to energy project. So this is certainly in tandem with solar, wind development, hydropower. is certainly a sector that's getting more attention, and I would expect to see more and more waste energy projects come to the market in the months and years ahead. Another question on Kuwait about Bubiyan Island. Is there any update? So the Bubiyan Island project, I'm not sure if you're referring to the real estate development of the island or development of the island overall, or the port project, but in both cases, development is very, very slow. Bubiyan Island was first pitched as a development project several years ago by Kuwait as a means of strengthening and confirming its sovereignty over the island against the claims of Iraq. We do know, of course, that the basic infrastructure and access roads for the port there has been built, but the port is still some way from being completed, and it's very slow progress. Likewise, the development overall of the island is also moving along very, very slowly. There was hope that with the completion of the Sabir Causeway across Kuwait Bay to the Sabir Peninsula and then onto Bubiyan Island would stimulate and act as an impetus for projects on Bubiyan, but as yet we haven't seen a lot of development. And unfortunately, Kuwait hasn't got a great track record of moving fast with projects, and I don't expect to see a very sudden or accelerated movement on this in the short term. A question about the Askar Solar Park by Aquapower in Bahrain. What is the update on this? I'm actually haven't got an update for you on that project, Mohammed. Let me come back to you on that one, because I do not at the moment have an up-to-date picture on that one. Another question, interesting project which people are talking about at the moment is the Dalma project situation and the retender. So just to provide some context, the Dalma oil and gas project was awarded in February for $1.5 billion to Petrofac for an onshore and offshore package. Unfortunately, just 3 weeks after it was awarded and announced by ADNOC, ADNOC decided to cancel that particular project. And since then, what we've seen is that ADNOC has held meetings with the same companies which pre-qualified for the first time round, and it intends to re-tender and still proceed with the project. So it does look like when they cancelled the Dalma contract a few months ago, that it was just temporary, and that they are still planning to go ahead with the project, albeit with a new tender process. So they have been meeting with the contractors to revise the scope and to outline the new scheme. What about the Marjan? So another big oil and gas project, Marjan, which was awarded last year, about $13–14 billion. So Aramco has asked the contractors to slow down on the various different dozen-plus packages on Marjan, and have asked them to extend the completion period by a year as a result. So work is still ongoing, and currently I believe the project is due to be completed in 2024 as opposed to 2023. So as far as I'm aware, that project is still proceeding, albeit slower than planned. Another Kuwait, actually two Kuwait questions, both on the same thing, which is the Al Zour Petrochemical Integrated Complex, otherwise known as PRIZE. As we know, with the idea was to integrate a new petrochemical facility with the Al Zour refinery, which is due to be completed soon. But I understand that given the current market situation, KPIC and KPC have decided to redo a feasibility study for the PRIZE complex to understand if it's still providing the right products, the right capacities, and whether it's still viable in a very changing and fast-changing market. So I believe this is now out. A feasibility study is being done again, and we'll know more once that feasibility study is completed. But it does seem, though, that with that decision to redo the feasibility study, that there are now more question marks about whether this project will proceed, which is a shame, because this is the one big project everyone is looking for in Kuwait, and if it's substantially delayed, that will be a blow to the petrochemical oil and gas market. in Kuwait. I'm not sure again if this is a question or a statement, but Petrofac will also be eligible for retendering for Dalma project. Yes, that's right. Although it had its contract cancelled by ADNOC, Petrofac has been invited for talks with ADNOC and will most likely be able to retender for Dalma once again, should it choose to do so. What is the latest about government budget cut for KPC subsidiaries? Again, in Kuwait, lots of questions for Kuwait today. I don't have the latest on that, I'm afraid. I'll have to look into it and come back to you, right? I don't have an answer to that question. Likewise, any update on the Ma'aden third phosphate fertilizer manufacturing facility? I don't have, on the top of my head, an update for that. I'll have to refresh my memory, look into it, and then I'll come back to you with some. And another question on Kuwait. Gosh, I haven't answered so many questions on Kuwait for a long time. Any update on the Jurassic project in Kuwait? 2 packages were supposed to be awarded in Q1 and Q2. So the Jurassic gas project in Kuwait is a major upstream gas initiative in the north of Kuwait, and it's been hit and miss over the last few years. As you're right in saying that we were supposed to see awards on these. We haven't heard anything on that. And given the lockdown in Kuwait and the hiatus of CTC tendering activity in Kuwait, I don't think there'll have been much activity in recent weeks. However, once the CTC starts operating again and approval can be given for this, then I might expect to see that proceed. Other than that, I don't have any major information. Another question, what is the latest for ADNOC Lightning major project? So the project Lightning is the ADNOC AD Power project for developers, private sector, to lay and operate undersea cables between Abu Dhabi mainland and ADNOC's offshore oil and gas operating assets. So this is to utilize excess capacity from the Baraka nuclear power facility when it comes on stream. And it's quite unusual, and that's been done on a private sector basis with the international developers submitting bids to operate these cable systems. Now, we understand more than a dozen international developers submitted expressions of interest or PQ applications for this project to ADNOC AD Power. And obviously, each one of them is going to be tying up with EPC contractors for this, subsea and offshore contractors. The list of the companies which submitted is on MEED Projects, but off the top of my head, I believe the usual players like Marubeni, Sumitomo, NG, EDF, Suez, Macro Power, so on, submitted their intention to bid for this particular project. Another Kuwait project, any update on soil remediation for KOC in Kuwait? This is a UN-funded project to rectify the damage done by the Iraqi invasion 30 years ago when they released huge amounts of oil in Kuwait. This is about remediating the environment and the soil conditions there. I haven't got any more update, just like other projects in Kuwait, public sector projects, it's been with the CTC. The CTC has been effectively closed for the last few months, and therefore there hasn't been a lot of movement on any public sector contract there. So no immediate update for that, I'm afraid. Right. What is the update for Hail and Gasha for all packages? Are all packages in tendering? Yes, they are. 4 major onshore and offshore packages, all several $1 billion each. Commercial bids are being pushed back several times due to the COVID-19 situation. The deadline's been delayed several times, but certainly we are expecting those bids to be submitted soon, and I am hopeful that we can see an award on the Hail and Gasha program by the end of the year, or if not end of the year, early next year. So that would be significant stimulus for oil and gas spending, and certainly the big one for Abu Dhabi and for the GCC oil and gas market this year. Question, is ADNOC keen to start production of hydrocarbons from the non-conventional areas? Yes, just like all NOCs these days, everyone is looking at unconventional production. Obviously, hail and gas is deep sour gas, so that's, I guess you can clarify that as, you can call that as non-conventional. Certainly, if you look at Saudi Arabia and their unconventional resources program, and other NOCs like PDO, for example, Jurassic Gas in Kuwait, there's a lot of non-conventional oil and gas production at the moment. And ADNOC is not going to be any different from that. Every NOC is clearly looking at in the area of gas in particular, at producing non-conventional or exploiting non-conventional oil and gas resources. Maybe less so on the oil side due to the uncertain demand outlook for oil, but certainly with demand for power generation, industrial development very strong, certainly non-conventional gas is where a lot of the focus lies. Okay, over to Oman for Duqm. How basically a question on whether a lot of the Duqm projects are in the long run feasible. So projects like Duqm Integrated Petrochemicals, the GTL program by Shell, the coal power plant, and so on. And rightfully so. In this uncertain environment, it's not clear whether a lot of these projects will go ahead. We have seen Total, for example, with its bunkering project in Sohar, put that on hold, and remains to be seen whether a lot of these investments in Duqm will proceed. I would say that the rationale for Duqm is basically to exploit its location on the international shipping routes and to act as a storage and export hub. And as a result, I am more hopeful that a lot of these projects are more feasible. And while not all will proceed, and I can't tell you which ones will certainly proceed and which ones won't, I am more optimistic that they will go ahead than perhaps projects in other locations. Any update on the labour market? Well, on the labour market, I can only talk in general terms. Clearly, we have seen and will see a large number of the workforce leave GCC. I think we've already seen, I think it was announced by Abu Dhabi, 324,000 blue-collar workers leave Abu Dhabi in the last few weeks and months. And I think we're going to see something like up to 10% of the workforce in the UAE overall leave. We're certainly seeing the same thing happen in Oman and in Saudi. In Kuwait, the estimates are that the new bill by the parliament is expected to require more than 1 million expatriate workers to leave Kuwait by the end of the year. So we are, in keeping with the decline in project market activity and demand for labour, we are also going to see an exodus of labour from the region. Now, what impact that has on the market, whether on the retail or real estate side, remains to be seen. But clearly, we're in a situation where there is a surplus of labour, and as a result, we are going to see a decline in the overall number of labour of expatriate workforces in the region. What are the investment plans in renewable energy sector, and which renewable energy projects are foreseen planned in Bahrain in near future? So I'm not aware of any, and again, it's maybe because I may not be aware or I've forgotten, but I'm not aware of any major significant renewable energy program off the top of my head in Bahrain right now. You know, Bahrain is a small kingdom and doesn't have quite the same maybe need or even space for renewable energy that other GCC states have. And I'm not entirely aware of any significant renewable energy project in the kingdom, I'm afraid. Okay, can I please brief us, give an update on the combined gas field in Jebel Ali and latest update for infrastructure facilities and drilling gas wells? So a few months ago, ADNOC and DUSUP, the Dubai Supply Authority, announced that they had discovered a very substantial gas field on the Abu Dhabi-Dubai border, which they would jointly develop. This is in and around Jebel Ali area. Obviously, this created a flurry of excitement at the time, and the question is whether there's been any major update on that. I haven't heard anything since that announcement. There's still a considerable amount of feasibility work going to be required, feed work and so forth, before any major infrastructure can be built or tendered on the project. My guess would be that we're still in that stage, and that we haven't yet got to the stage where there's a plan for how the packages and the work will be tendered out, or even if the project will fully go ahead. So I don't have any information up to that yet. There was a road and bridge project in Bahrain called Al Fataha. Any news about it? There were bids submitted a few days ago for a bridge in Bahrain, but I can't remember the details. Bids were submitted and the prices were announced. So if you go onto MEED Projects or MEED.com, you will get the latest on that. Okay, so no more questions. Thank you for those. Okay, any questions? There's one final question. Any information on the new project in the north of Kuwait? This is something that keeps popping up. There is no, as far as I know, there is no new airport project in the north of Kuwait. Kuwait is building currently, expanding the Kuwait International Airport. Limak of Turkey is building that under a $5 billion contract, and the airport will be opening in the next couple of years. That is the major airport project in Kuwait. There was a mention of a new airport planned in Kuwait a couple of years ago, but I believe that idea has been abandoned. There is, as far as I know, no plan for a new airport in the north of Kuwait. And indeed, one of the reasons for that is because this idea for a new airport in Kuwait in the north is not new, but one of the reasons why it's never been explored or developed further is because the nature or the location of the airport and the circling patterns of aircraft would mean that they would have to overfly into Iraqi airspace in order to land or take off, and that's not really feasible for various different reasons. Gosh, another Kuwait project. Any updates on the metro project in Kuwait? The long-awaited metro project in Kuwait, the KAPP, the Public-Private Partnership Authority, announced this week that the metro is still very much with the Public Transport Authority, and they're waiting to hear back from them about this. But if I was to be pragmatic, I would say that the metro project in Kuwait is not moving fast anytime soon. On the other hand, we have seen the contracts for the feasibility study of the second phase of the metro project in Riyadh be submitted, and it does look like there will be a couple of new metro lines in Riyadh. One is to connect with the Qiddiya project. Another one is a project which will crisscross Riyadh. And of course, another unfortunate blow to metro projects in the region is that Qatar recently announced that it was cancelling the expansion, the tenders for the expansion of the green and red metro lines there. So that's another blow to the railway community. However, I noticed yesterday that the SRO in Saudi Arabia issued a pre-qualification notice for a new double-track freight line between Riyadh and Dammam. So that's several hundred kilometers long, and that is a major project, and that's something to keep an eye on, as that would suggest that Saudi Arabia is moving on this new railway network. And a comment at the end: nothing is moving fast, it seems, in Kuwait. Correct. Kuwait has never been the most dynamic of projects markets, and unfortunately, things move quite slowly there. Okay, I've run out of time. Thank you very much for all your questions. This is being recorded, so you will get the link to your email once we've edited it, and you'll be able to look at this in your own time. As ever, thank you very much for your attention and for your questions, and I look forward to speaking to you all again soon. In the meantime, please stay safe, and feel free to contact me if you have any comments or questions. Thank you very much.